Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming in person, and also those of you who are joining us virtually for the live stream or the recording of this meeting a little later. We're really glad to have all of you here and looking forward to telling you some more information about the Northwest Resiliency Project, and as importantly, get some more feedback from you about your hopes and your priorities for this important resiliency initiative. I'm BJ Jones. I'm President and CEO of the Battery Park City Authority, and I'm happy to be joined by Martha Gallo, our acting chair of the board and longtime resident, and many colleagues and team members who are associated with this project who you will get to know a little later this evening. I'd also like to thank Tammy Meltzer and the community board for being here and also for helping to lift up community voices as we work to make some important decisions when it comes to what a resilient battery park city looks like. It's really timely that we're talking about resiliency tonight. Hurricane Fiona is making headline news. And so, we're ever mindful of making sure that Battery Park City and Lower Manhattan are built to last. So this is another step in that direction. This is our fourth public meeting on the Northwest Resiliency topic. And tonight, we're going to go through a few things. We're going to give you a summary of the feedback we heard at our last community meeting back in June. We're going to give you a little bit more information about the project that's ahead of us. And then we're going to dive into some alignment concepts and some alternatives based on the feedback we've seen. And hopefully this will trigger some more ideas from you and more thoughts about how we might approach resiliency and balance the range of priorities that this neighborhood has for this project. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end of this session, and then we'll have another open house kind of format for the last part of this meeting, where we'll have the renderings of the concepts that you'll be seeing during this presentation in the big boards in the back, and you'll be able to interact with the project team directly and ask questions and also share your ideas. And this is not your only chance to give us feedback on this project. We'll make note of it at the end, but you can always contact us at the authority if you have questions. We have a dedicated email, nwbpcr.info@bpca.ny.gov, but we'll repeat it again. And that is just a helpful way to just get all of the feedback specific to this project into the right hands. So again, thanks again for caring about this project and for coming to learn more, and hopefully for sharing your ideas and your thoughts later this evening. And with that, I will turn it over to Nora Madonic, who's gonna tell you a little bit more about this evening's agenda and walk us through the program. Nora?
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you again. I just want to go over tonight how we're going to go through our Q&A. During the course of the presentation, you may come up with questions that you want to ask. You may come up with comments that you want to make. We've given, everyone should have a card and a pen that was on their seat. We will have folks walking through the aisles with more cards and pens if you need them. We'll collect those, and then I will ask the questions of the panel. So I'll collect your questions and we'll organize them. We've been doing this way for the last several years. Make sure that we can get all of the questions possible asked. We'll have about 20 minutes of questions, and then we will open up the back of the room, and we will have boards that will replicate a lot of what you're going to see tonight. And there will be project people in the back, and you can talk with them. You can also put Post-its up on the boards. All of your comments are considered, collected, forwarded to the project team, and made a record of. Just so that we know, this is not a public hearing, it's a public meeting. There will be lots of opportunities of public hearings for you to make statements, Tonight is a night to ask questions and to make comments on the alignments that you're seeing. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Gwen Dawson from BPCA.
Nora, I've got to pull this down some. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good evening, everyone, and I'd like to echo BJ's delight in seeing all of you here in person. It's been a long time, so we're very happy that you could join us this evening. I am Gwen Dawson. I'm the Vice President of Real Property for Battery Park City Authority, and it is the Real Property Department that is managing the resiliency projects, and it's my honor to be involved in these projects. Before I get started with a little background for our resiliency program, just want to recognize Tammy Meltzer again as chair of the Community Board 1 and ask if you would like to say a few words before we go further.
I want to thank everybody who's come tonight. It's really important that we engage as a community, not just for those of us who are here, but that the responsibility for every person in this room is to tell a neighbor, tell a friend, tell a colleague, tell a family who comes and loves this neighborhood or tourists to visit, to take a look at the online portal and provide feedback. This park and all of the resiliency serves all of Lower Manhattan, and to a wider stance, all of the community. We need to make sure we have multiple voices and everyone has an opportunity. So I challenge everyone in this room, don't just tell one person, as they say, and 2 people, tell 10, tell 20, tell as many people as you can to get as much feedback as we can, because this is our open space for all New Yorkers. Thanks.
Thank you, Tammy. And also just like to recognize Alice Blank, who's chair of the Environmental Protection Committee, and Justine Kucha, who is chair of the Battery Park City Committee of Community Board 1. So we're so happy to have all of you here this evening. Before I turn it over to the really good stuff for the evening, I'd like to do a little bit of background. I know that most all of you have been to meetings before, or you're familiar with our resiliency program, but I don't want to assume that all of you do. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how we got to where we are now, what we've accomplished, and what we still have yet to go. If we could start with the slide here. This shows the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Program. And if you start at the right side, you'll see the East Side Coastal Resiliency project. Going down, you'll see the Brooklyn Bridge Montgomery Coastal Resiliency Project, and then the FIDI Seaport Climate Resiliency Master Plan. All 3 of those projects are being managed by the City of New York. And then at the very tip of Manhattan, along the waterside edge of the Battery, is the Battery Coastal Resilience Project. That project is also being done by the City of New York. It's a little bit different than the others. It's not a coastal surge project. It is meant to address only sea level rise. And we can get into what the difference is between those 2 approaches a little bit later. But as you get to the west of that project, you'll see the Battery Park City projects come into relief, starting with the South project. And if we go to the next slide, they'll get a little bit closer view of this. The South Battery Park City Resiliency Project that extends from the Museum of Jewish Heritage, First Place, through Wagner Park, Pure Plaza, and the northern edge of the Battery. And then there's in the little dot right at the top, you'll see the Battery Park City Ball Fields Resiliency Project. That was a very specific asset-driven project, because that was where Battery Park City suffered a significant amount of damage during Superstorm Sandy, lost the ball fields, and some very significant damage to the community center adjacent to the ball fields. That project, we're happy to say, was completed almost a year ago now. The project that we're talking about tonight is the Northwest Battery Park City Resiliency Project, which begins in Tribeca And if you can look at the left side of their screen here, I'm pointing at that screen. You are watching this one, but that's okay. It starts in Tribeca and then extends along the waterside edge of Battery Park City southward till it connects with the South Battery Park City Resiliency Project at First Place. Now you may wonder why we are going into outside of Battery Park City boundaries into Tribeca. And that will be, again, explained a little bit more in detail as we go forward. But we have to connect high points to high points in order to make sure that we don't have a situation where the water simply goes around our flood barrier system and comes in the back door, so to speak. So I just want to point out there are those of you who were very involved with this project in its inception. This project at one time was two separate projects. It was a North Battery Park City project, and there was a West Battery Park City project. We had actually begun design work for the North Battery Park City Resiliency Project with AECOM as our design engineer. We had started to commence the project for the West. But at that point in time, in the spring of 2020, we received design build authority from the state legislature. Now that gave us a different way to pursue these projects. And as a result of that, the decision was made to combine these two projects into a single Northwest BPC resiliency project. But the work that was done for the North project has been carried forward and is being reflected in the current Northwest resiliency project. Is that the, here we go. Our project vision is centered on safety, resiliency and environmental stewardship, engagement and collaboration, which we've already talked a lot about, design excellence. This is a very beautiful neighborhood and we want it to remain a beautiful neighborhood. And so design excellence is a huge part of what we're doing. Of course, budget and schedule compliance is hugely important in any project. Effective project management and accountability so that we do what we say we're going to do, and you can be assured and comforted that you're going to get what we indicate that we're going to do. There's also, we want to have sustainable design and long-term operating and maintenance opportunities. The key objectives are mitigation through design. We want the design to be user-friendly. We want it to fit the needs of the residents and the people who visit and use Battery Park City and Battery Park City open spaces. We want to make sure that every portion of the design is integrated so that there are our sustainability goals, programming, and enhanced user experiences. We want to make sure that we retain and, where possible, enhance the public spaces that are so important to the folks who live here and who visit and use this wonderful space. We want to make sure that we are incorporating sustainability into our plans. We have a sustainability plan that was launched last year that we're very proud of and that we take very seriously. We want to make sure that our resiliency projects reflect the principles and the tenets of that sustainability plan. With that, and right before I turn it over to Garrett Avery from AECOM, I just want to take a moment to recognize the folks on my staff who you will get to know much better over the course of this project. Claudia Filomena, who's our Director of Capital Projects, Varun Kohli, who is our Assistant Vice President of Planning and Design, and there are others who are not here this evening. Okay, all right. Claudia and Varun, come on up so people can recognize you and you can wave your hands. Okay, so get to know these folks. You will see a lot of them. Okay, all right. And I am very excited this evening to be introducing our progressive design build contracting team. The design build approach, that we have adopted, which Garrett will explain to you a little bit more, involved the retention of a consulting engineer. We retained AECOM as our consulting engineer, who is acting as an owner's rep for the authority throughout the project, and has aided us in procuring a top-notch, world-class team to design and construct this project. And we are very, very happy to have Turner Construction, EE Crews, along with their design team, including Arcadis Engineering, Scape, Big, and who, if I, is that it? Okay. They're a great team, and there are a few others that Garrett will talk to you about. But I'm so very happy and gratified that we're able to provide such a terrific set of experts for this really super important project. And thank you again.
Karen, let me just pop in for a second, and I'm speaking to the folks who are watching by live stream. The chat is now open, so please use the chat to enter your comments or your questions. We'll be pulling those down, and we'll be using them during the Q&A. Thank you.
All right, so if it's all right with everyone, I'm going to stay here and continue advancing the slides instead of standing up. But I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about how this project has developed and is continuing to develop. Now, my apologies, Sammy. I'm Garrett Avery with AECOM, landscape architect by background, and the design task lead for the consulting engineer role. And I'm originally from New Hampshire. Progressive design build, as Gwen mentioned before, allows the authority to leverage the authorization that they received. And what it has done is allowed a package of risk reduction in the form of risk leveling in a way that parties that are most able to manage a risk are the ones responsible for the risk, which is a little bit different than other types of procurements. It also allows for design flexibility. It allows for inline cost efficiency and understanding of construction in design, rather than designing and then reaching a point where you must redesign or otherwise work through some challenging aspects when it comes to the time to construct. So it eliminates that concern, and there's the hope for overall time savings because of that combination and collaborative environment. So the way the team is set up, essentially a partnership through AECOM's role as a consulting engineer with the Turner EE Crews team, along with Arcadis, Big, and Scape. All of you, and as well as our project stakeholders, including Community Board 1, Battery Park City's Internal Resiliency Working Group, and of course other buildings owners, managers, and residents, as well as a fairly extensive list of city, state, and federal agency partners that are in one way or another connected to the project. So I'm not going to go through this timeline in terrific detail because I realize it's small and a little bit busy on the screen, but there is a full-size board in the back for the timeline. But the important part is to first start on the top line, understanding that we have three things going on at once. But this began over a year ago. And BJ mentioned earlier that tonight is the fourth community meeting, but it's actually the seventh time since we got started a year ago that we've been together. In the very beginning, it was really about collecting information and understanding the technical criteria that were important, especially conducted workshops, talking through each of the particular areas, walking with members of the community, trying to gauge a level of concern for a particular item, experience, aesthetic, and then actually set the parameters for this team to respond to, which I think they've done quite well. From there, we put together the procurement process, and through a short list of 3 folks, asked each to prepare concepts and submit conceptual design, their best idea with a cost associated. And through that process, which we shared with you in June at our open house, we've arrived with this fantastic team. So very quickly, hit this before, but since we started last year, we've received over 500 comments already, which is a great start, but we're of course asking for more. We met first in August of last year, the workshops in October and November, at a community meeting in December. We were back together in June for the open house, and we're here again. So very quickly, we've received, like I said, over 400 comments, but they really started to group into certain particular areas. Parks and open space was a major concern. Overall project timeline was a major concern. Environmental sustainability, public engagement, access and mobility, and of course, waterfront views and waterfront access. And of the more than 500 comments we've received to date, about 250 were received just in June, just a couple of months ago during the open house. And we consider that a phenomenal guide for the work you're about to see. Among the many comments, we heard very loudly and clearly that minimizing impact to Rockefeller Park is of paramount importance, maintaining and improving waterfront views, preserving public art within South Cove, and potentially adding to the ecological value and experience of South Cove that they're now. And then also noted that the concept of moving the ferry terminal slightly north was not desired necessarily. We'll talk through logistics of that in just a minute. So to do that, I would like to invite Peter to join here and take us through conceptual reach alternatives.
Great. Great, thanks, Jared. My name is Peter Gluss. I work with Arcadis. And before we get too deep in this, I just want to make sure that I recognize Jeremy from Bjarke Ingels Group and Kate from Scape Architecture. They're going to be co-presenting with me these reach alternatives. So what we're going to show over the next 20 minutes or so are a set of graphics that have technically evolved some of the visuals that you've seen in the past meetings. And the design team has been studying those 500 comments, and we tried to integrate those comments into some of the choices that we've made in some of the concepts that you'll be seeing. Generally, what you'll see is we'll go by reach. So we'll start from reach 1 and we'll go to reach 7. And each reach will have representations of the concept alignments, and we'll conclude each reach with the pros and cons at a really high level. The goal of this presentation in the next 20 minutes or so really is to drive you towards those boards in the back of the room. What we really want to do is engage you technically at a deeper level at the reaches specifically in the back of the room. So what we're trying to do right now is basically introduce and give you a high-level overview with hopes that that will prompt you to go back to the boards and interact with some of the design team members at the reaches in the back room. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Jeremy.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm Jeremy Siegel with Bjarke Ingels Group. We are the urban and architectural design lead on this, working together with Scape on the public realm components of the plan. And we're really happy to be here working on this important project for the neighborhood and for Lower Manhattan. So as Peter said, Kate and I will be taking you through reach by reach and kind of alternating back and forth between us. And I'm going to start here with reach 1, which is the northernmost segment of the project and is what we refer to as the tieback, meaning the place that the flood protection moves up to high ground to make sure that water isn't coming in from the north. Tiebacks tend to be difficult because they need to go inland. Therefore, there's a lot of subsurface utilities and infrastructure. That's definitely something that's present here. The other thing that really defines this area is Route 9A, running north-south, as well as the Manhattan Greenway, the bikeway. And so we've looked at 2 alternatives here, and I'll take you through each of them. The first one that we're seeing here, we call it 1A. It ties into North Moore Street, beginning at the eastern end of that street with a low element up against the Borough of Manhattan Community College, then running along the sidewalk on the eastern edge of Route 9A, crossing over Route 9A with a set of swing gates, and then running along the Manhattan Greenway with a roughly 10-foot high structure before it ties into the relieving platform of the northern esplanade. So these are significant structures, and they're engineered basically to respond to the flood levels that have been modeled for this area. They also include a fair amount of what we call deployables, so gates, whether they're roller gates or swing gates, to make sure that access is maintained as you're approaching the waterfront. And a lot of the community comments that we heard about this area have very much to do with that waterfront access and the safety of biking. For those reasons, we've also looked at another alternatives here, which is 1B, the Chambers Street alignment. We've kind of rotated around here, so now we're looking north. And what we're looking at here is basically a flood protection system that would move southward from the northern esplanade there, running along Route 9A in the median between the bike path and the plaza in front of Stuyvesant High School, crossing over Route 9A with a set of swing gates, and then we're really trying to minimize its presence, integrating with the handball walls in Washington Market, tennis court area, and then potentially, this is something that's subject to further modeling. We can either stop the flood protection there to meet our design elevation, or we may need to look at an element that's roughly between 1 and 3 feet along the edge of Washington Market Park. So that's our first reach. Between them, looking at the advantages and disadvantages, and we can kind of speak about this further at the boards in the back. What we're looking at here in 1A is something that offers a greater area of protection and potentially fewer agency regulatory reviews, but that we believe may come with more urban design impacts in terms of views and access, more deployable elements, and higher operations and maintenance costs as a result. In Reach 1B, there is more passive elements, meaning elements that don't need to be operated before a storm comes in, and reduced urban design impacts. However, the amount of area that we're protecting is of course lessened. And there are some additional impacts on Stuyvesant High School, Washington Market Park, and potential limitations to the Tribeca Bridge during its construction. Reach 2, the Northern Esplanade. This area is maybe a little bit more straightforward, really defined by its acting as a gateway as you're approaching from the north towards the Battery Park City waterfront. Here, to accomplish the flood protection, we need to integrate up against the Stuyvesant High School building, and so the entire platform here essentially needs to be reconstructed. In this alternative 2A, we're keeping basically the same cross-section that the platform has today, meaning the east-west movement, the area for trees on either side, is kind of maintained in its current dimension. And so because this is such an important corridor for movement, and because engagement with the water is something that has really been expressed as a desire in some of the community engagement feedback, we've also been looking at an option here that would extend further out into the water. It would have some shadowing impacts, which means that there'd be additional regulatory review with agencies such as those that govern the water. However, there are some benefits here in terms of the amount of space for movement, for planting, tree canopy, et cetera. So kind of a classic trade-off between sort of urban design result, but then also permitting schedule and some other aspects.
Great. Oops. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Orff. I'm a landscape architect. Scape is a women-owned business. We're located right here on Chambers Street. We work around the country, and we're very excited to be part of this important project. So I'm going to talk you through Reach 3, which is Rockefeller Park. And this is a beloved park. You can go to the next slide. And having also formerly lived at 20 River Terrace, I understand how much this is used and beloved. So
Just to talk you through this in a little bit more detail, this is 3A, our minimal park impact, and we, as a design team, are leaning toward this alternative. It's really an inland alignment that incorporates a flood wall along River Terrace that will be only 3 feet up from grade. This alternative allows for minimal visual and physical impacts to these park spaces, and also, but it does require a slight reorganization of the sports courts, and it creates a new opportunity to open a path toward the esplanade. I don't know if you can indicate that, Garrett, on the screen. It raises the playground right in front of us here by a couple of feet in situ, but so we'll be able to kind of place the flood alignment on the outer side of the playground. And the number of impacted trees in this particular scenario is approximately 30. The next alternative, which is 3B, moves that sort of what we're calling a middle alignment. You can see the red line on the screen. It incorporates a flood barrier system through the middle of Rockefeller Park in the form of a planted accessible berm. And it requires a reorganization of the sports course and playground, et cetera. And the number of impacted trees is greater. So you can probably see why we're leaning toward the first alternative. This slide kind of sums up the considerations. Reach 3A, Alternative A, a more minimal park impact with also potential opportunities for get downs. And reach 3B, reduced risk towards the park during storms. And I will just highlight that the disadvantage in 3A is that in the future, sometime in the future, the park may be out of service for extended periods. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about reach 4.
Sure to use the Q&A. Okay? Thank you. Well, I think that what we could do is give you a minute or two to get them written down, but we'll do the Q&A all at the same time at the end because we want to give you a chance to go back to the boards and to talk with the project team. Okay?
Okay, I'll just take a pause. Is that? Sure. Why don't we go back one slide and just, we can have just a moment to sit on this slide.
You will have another opportunity to do that at the boards yourselves. We're trying to make sure that there's enough. We can do that. We can absolutely stop at each. We're not trying to rush through anything. We can absolutely stop at each board, at each slide and give you a chance to take a look at it. What I'd like to do is to not answer the questions about the reach because that will take us well into the night.
What we can do at the end is we can go back to each of the consideration slides, let it sit for a minute so that you can be reminded of any questions that you might have before we're done.
Okay. Let's take a moment on this slide. The next reach, reach 4, is called Belvedere Plaza. And This, if you go to the next slide, basically we have essentially the same flood alignment in both A and B. It is a more passive flood barrier system. And it incorporates the flood alignment in a new elevated plaza and accessible planted berm. And the two, A and B, only differ relative to the positioning of the ferry terminal. And I just wanted to emphasize this is a Port Authority element, right? So, but it's very important for you all to, make your comments heard in this broader context. So for option A, the idea is to potentially relocate the ferry platform. And what this does, and you can see, we'll spend a moment on this slide. What this does is it enables views from the Statue of Liberty, from the Irish Hunger Memorial, which was the design intent of that element. It also creates more space for ferry access and queuing near the ferry terminal. And the disadvantages are that it moves the ferry terminal closer to the residential buildings and the playground. And we're very mindful and heard all of the community comments about emissions and noise, et cetera, from the ferry terminals. So Reach 4B alternative looks at basically this will potentially have to be moved temporarily during construction, but it would be moved back into the location that it is now in option B. It has a more constrained area for a ferry waiting zone, and it would potentially have a higher construction cost and a longer construction period. So I'll just sit on this slide for a minute. In both cases, okay, this is I don't have a pointer, but maybe Garrett, you could point towards the Irish Hunger Memorial. Or go back to a plan that has the labels. Let's go back one that has the labels. Okay, so you have the Irish Hunger Memorial in the center of this image, and you can see this is a relocated, temporarily relocated Battery Park Ferry Street Terminal, which is here, correct. And it's only about 170 feet, so you can see that it's quite minimal, but the impacts obviously are felt in different ways. So you can see the Irish Hunger Memorial, you can see North End Avenue and Vesey Street, BC Street. So I'm gonna
We're not going to answer
discussing,
questions until we get to the Q&A.
That would be great to put on the cards, yeah.
Just put them on the cards and we'll collect them and we'll talk about it all. Thank you. Let me see what I can do.
We can actually have members of the team actually try to. If you want, I can get it. Yeah, we can do that.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Okay. Whoa. Hey, hold on, everybody. Whoa. Look, if there's something that is not entirely clear, you got two options. We'll try to explain it as best we can. You can walk up and get closer if that will help, or you can wait until the end when we will have all of these images on the boards in the back, and you'll have an opportunity to see them up close and ask specific questions of the specific team members about them. Okay? do our best to try to make it clear, folks. But again, if you wish to come closer, if you wish to get up, you're more than welcome to stand up to come closer. If you can't see from where you are sitting, please.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, that's okay. Thank you for the suggestion. Trying to understand the best way to make sure that the people who are here tonight can get the information that we're trying to convey. So if you're not seeing this, I take that point. We'll try to clarify. We can't generate new images tonight, so we have the images that we have right now. So we can try to explain them, and then if you wish to come closer or get closer to the images, that's fine too. Okay? Can you?
Sure. So let me try to explain this a little bit more to try to make it more clear. So the reason why we have to move the ferry terminal right now is because the ferry terminal sits next to what's called a relieving platform. And that platform has to be reconstructed during the project and elevated. So that presents a problem to us, right? Because it's very complicated to do the construction in the platform area in front of the ferry terminal because that cuts off the use of the ferry terminal. And so that's really what these two options are, right? The first option is during construction, our proposal was to move the ferry terminal, and then when the construction is completed, leave it there. Option B is we were going to do the construction after moving the ferry terminal and then move it back to its original location. One way or another, we have to wrestle with the fact that it's almost impossible to reconstruct the platform without moving the ferry terminal in some way. Sure. The platform needs to be reconstructed because it's not at sufficient elevation to create for a resilient flood protection system. You know, my job right now is to clarify this image, and that's a great conversation for further conversation in the back. Absolutely. Right. So thank you. So again, just to clarify this, so on Reach 4, that's what we're talking about, and that's why we're proposing to do what we're doing, because we have to wrestle with the platform. Questions about the platform would be great for the general Q&A after we go through the reaches.
I'm sorry, I understand you have a question, but we can't hear you. This is not how it's set up to the question and answer. So please put it on card. Please ask the question during the question and answer period, if you would, please.
Let's see if we can hear what the presentation is so that we can get to the questions, because we'd really like to. All right, let's just give it a chance. Just give it a chance.
Great, so then I think I've clarified why we're talking about the ferry terminal, so I'd like to move to Reach 5, and then those questions that you've had previously raised, we'll address during the general Q&A.
Okay, I think this one works. I'm going to stand. All right, if we continue to Reach 5? Yeah? Okay. So Reach 5, a really important place both for the neighborhood and for the city. 26 million annual visitors, hundreds of annual events held outside, dozens of ground floor uses that are super important. In the community engagement feedback on this area, waterfront views. Basically, this waterfront plaza really depends on its connection to Sure. No, I'm talking generally. Views from Brookfield Plaza. So here, just to orient you, we have the Hudson River here. We have the Winter Garden and Brookfield Place surrounding it here. And then in this area is where today the existing waterfront plaza exists. And in sort of the faded area are all the areas that will be maintained as they are existing today. And then within this black dotted line, everything inside of that, which is sort of more saturated in color, are the areas that we will need to reconstruct in order to create a flood protection alignment system through this area. And this is the first option that we're looking at for that. The reason that in this scenario, which we call 5A, the flood protection is towards the back, is that the further back we go, the lower the height needs to be to reach the design level. Because further out here, there are a lot of waves. The wave action is stronger. And so when you build flood protection closer to the water, basically the barrier needs to be higher. So what we've done is we've minimized the height of the barrier by pushing it as far back as possible. And we actually think here, this is one of the places where we have a great opportunity to sort of rethink an area which has a lot of great things going for it, but that could also be potentially improved in some ways. Some of the things that we've heard in this area particularly are shade. It's a great place, but there's not a lot of shade, and as the climate becomes hotter, that's going to be something everyone's going to want. Universal access, meaning ADA accessibility or ramps. If you've ever taken a bike or a stroller or a wheelchair through this area, you'll know that there are actually very few ways to get from the upper levels to the lower levels on a ramp. Some areas of this park were built and designed sort of before universal accessibility was the currency of design in the city. And so we think we also have the opportunity here to introduce universal accessibility further back in the plaza. So just to go through the 4 segments here, in Belvedere Plaza, we're basically doing as minimal an intervention as we can to preserve as many trees as we can in this really beautiful stand of trees that are on axis with the Winter Garden. So there's a low element here of about 3 feet high, which we're proposing be integrated with seeding, planting, water potentially. And then as we move further towards the Winter Garden itself, the terraced areas, which today are this polished kind of granite, would be reconstructed to put the flood protection in. They're actually, you can see them here in these white dotted lines, path tunnels that are coming underneath. And so the platform underneath the plaza further back here, portions of that need to be reconstructed because a bridging element needs to be made underneath this red line. There's a lot of complex engineering under there, which I think we'll be able to get into the details of more the further we get in this process. But to go through the broad strokes here, we're basically looking at something that would reconstruct the area in front of the Winter Garden. We'd be able to maintain the food and beverage, the PJ Clark's, Le District, et cetera, their outdoor seating and the groves of trees that shade that seating, and basically work on everything outboard of that. We also think there's an opportunity here to rethink the edge of the marina itself. So we're representing here kind of a more engagement with the water, allowing more kinds of people, those that don't just have boats, but who are visiting from anywhere to sort of enjoy the marina. And then as we move further south past Pump House Park, we're really making sure to preserve that in its entirety, really not touch it. We're adding about 10 feet of park to that edge and then creating the flood protection there with a kind of seating wall. And then once we're past there, as we get to the Gateway residences, we're able to integrate directly into the line of the privacy wall. And so there we think the impact should be pretty minimal. So it's something that will really impact the look and feel of this place. We think that could be an opportunity. It's definitely something that community engagement and of course engagement with the owners here would have a lot of input into. And if we go to the next one, of course one could say that while there's a lot of opportunity in the previous option, it is disruptive to the operation and the businesses and the activity that the plaza hosts today. So we have, because we do need to look at alternatives, and that's the reason we have alternatives here, we're required to look at alternatives. We have looked at the only other feasible alternative we see for this area, at least from a technical perspective, would be to construct the flood protection along the bulkhead itself. As I said, the wave action here is much higher, so that element actually needs to be higher. So it would be a pretty significant structure here. And we've indicated here. So it would 21 feet above sea level. Above sea level. Yep, hold on. Yep, so we represent this. However, I would say that our very strong leaning as a team in totality is the first option that we showed, 5A. I don't think that the second option is anything that anybody wants to see. Right. Yes. So Esplanade Plaza, on the back of the public space, the engagement space, the public run, the walk, the space that people in the community use to kids or ride a bike, people walk through, jog. You're talking about massive changes to the public realm, but there's no consideration in showing us actually any sampling. Sure. 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 I mean, I can address that. So the focus on today's meeting is about the alignment that we choose. There's a lot of work that needs to go into design, exactly the issues you're talking about. That's not to say that we haven't thought about them, looked at them very closely. We have. There's a lot of representation that needs to come out. We're at the beginning of our process here, and I agree with you. It's great to be able to look at visuals. I think we'll be sure to have visuals for you the next time we're out here, because that's really the crux of it, right? That's what we're all going to experience. So I don't think we disagree with you. And I'm sorry that the material isn't clear enough
If I could
tonight.
just clarify a little bit more. I mean, we are talking about alignments, and I understand that for. Can you hear me now? Okay, great, thank you. We're talking about alignments, and I understand that it's fuzzy when we're trying to distinguish between alignments and design. We're trying to determine where the flood barrier line will go. Once that determination is made, then there's a lot of design. There's a lot of additional details that we have to get to in order to determine what the impacts will be for the Esplanade Plaza, the views, and how we address that, and are there creative ways that we can perhaps approach things within that alignment in different ways. So I just want you to try to keep in mind that we have a long way to go from where we are today, and there's a lot of design work that still has to happen.
Thank you, Gwen. Is it all right if we proceed to reach 6? Okay. All right. So the South Esplanade. In some ways, I would say almost as iconic as North Cove in a different way, right? This is about that long view out towards the water to New Jersey, the historic Esplanade. Like when you think about Battery Park City, you think about this Esplanade in a lot of ways. So here, we're basically looking at two alternatives, and I'll already just kind of flash the two on. Here's the first one. So in both of them, we're looking at a flood protection system that would basically hug the existing line of the privacy wall. And that's basically to make sure that we're maximizing the amount of public realm, right? That we're not reducing the amount of public space that we have on the esplanade itself. We already have a roughly 8-foot privacy wall back there, so it's a good place to put the flood protection. At the major street entries, Albany Street, Rector Place, West Thames, we have roller gates so that as you're approaching the water, your view won't be blocked. Those would be operated just before a storm. And because we're constructing that flood protection system from the park side, we can't construct it from the other side because, of course, there's terraces and ground floor apartments. There are construction impacts within basically a distance that's to be determined. But what it means is that we both will have impacts on the trees that line immediately that red line. But in this scenario, we're able to preserve those mature trees, about 60 of them, that line the esplanade itself. So this is the direction we're really trying to go, where we preserve as much of the existing esplanade as possible, because we know that shade is really important to folks. We know that sort of preserving as much as we can of the existing and making do with what we have is what we'd like to do whenever we can. The construction of that flood protection system in the back of the park, however, it's tricky because you have a relieving platform that goes all the way basically up to the privacy wall. There's a few feet between the pier and the privacy wall, and it's a similar condition in Reach 4 at the ferry terminal. And in that case, there's actually no space, which is why the relieving platform needs to be reconstructed. In this case, we think that we can fit it. This is going to require further technical study. So as Peter was saying, we do have sort of leanings in some cases, and in this case, we're going to be really strongly looking at the alternative 6A. In the case that we do have to reconstruct the entirety of the platform, we're carrying that as an alternative, and we're representing it to you here. The impacts, of course, would be that the entirety of the platform and everything on it would be reconstructed. It would be elevated if we do reconstruct it to a higher elevation just to get that added benefit for sea level rise in the future. And we do see, the added benefit that we could rethink the edge and perhaps get some more engagement with the water. But as I said, I think we're really looking here at trying to accomplish 6A because we know how important impacts to the existing trees are, and we'd also like to be doing this as sustainably as we can, meaning using what we have as much as possible. It's roughly 8 feet from existing ground level today. That's about how high the flood protection needs to be. So it'll be pretty similar. Yeah, so that's a really tricky thing about running flood protection through this stretch, right? You have a platform, which is basically over water. Essentially, if you were to look underneath this thing, you would see water all the way up to the red line. There's water underneath that entire area. So really, the buildings start at the water's edge. The only way to do flood protection is on dry land, and we can't fill into the water. So this area is the area that we have to work with. We're working with a great constructor who are going to be looking at everything they can do to make it as quick as possible and as painless as possible. I can't speak to the details of that they can in the future, but that's certainly top of mind. And I think also, certain things like privacy and screening, and I think we'll want to speak with all of the tenants along those ground floors to see what's important. Sure. Yeah, so the South Battery Park City project is a separate process. Some of us are not involved in that, some are. I would turn that question to those either now or at the boards. I can't speak to the details of that one.
If I could say that was a design decision. Once we figured out where the alignment needed to be next to the museum, and certainly I would see that being on the table as a legitimate design question once we move forward.
Okay. All right, if we go to reach 7.
Okay. So we're now at reach 7, South Cove. Hopefully you're oriented towards this image. You can see the cove in the foreground, the actual cove, the Mary Miss sculpture and sculptural element here to the right of the screen, and the regatta on the corner, the Montessori on the corner. And many of the main point of reach 7 is the lightest touch possible while maintaining and weaving this flood protection alignment towards the back of the esplanade and integrating it with the existing privacy walls. So our goals here are really to preserve and respect the intent of Mary Miss and the design of this incredible immersive landscape. So everything that's in the sort of white tone is untouched. We do need some modest grading in the corners to be able to meet the flood alignment area. In general, though, we see this particular reach as a great opportunity for potentially increased ecological interventions and step downs and being able to interact with the river and the cove, because that's really what this is all about, this place. So I guess in the next slide, we have a sort of summary of the considerations, and we really just have some sub options because the community comments were so passionate about preserving this landscape. We have some sub options relative to the lower walkway, which is here. I think I can reach this area there. That's the lower walkway. And so the thought here is over time, there may be an opportunity to introduce intertidal plantings, increased sort of public interaction with the water's edge, and to really, extend the sort of artist intent of Mary Miss, who we are in very close contact with, into this sort of public realm design in the future. Again, we're really discussing the alignment location here, which is the red line towards the back of the screen here, with deployables and with the line of protection roughly along the edge of the building. So that is essentially a kind of a high level summary of our approach to reach 7. The disadvantages are with sea level rise, these lower areas will be regularly inundated, but in some cases, especially if we design some of these lower zones for intertidal habitat, that could also be transformed into a habitat advantage, depending on if you're a fish or a person. If you're a fish, it's very positive. I think I'll stop there, but in general, I'll pass it back to Peter for some remarks.
Great, thanks, Kate. Slide. Great, so this just shows the overarching reaches 1 through 7. As I said, we walk through each one of these reaches to present some of these concept alternatives. And in some cases, the authority has a leaning towards one alternative that they expressed. In some cases, we're still weighing those options. Maybe we'll leave this slide on the screen and maybe you can finalize your questions. And then we'll enter into the general Q&A. And I'll reiterate, our intention is to engage people in more deep discussions on design on the board. And we have members of the project team waiting at the boards to talk about some of the feedback that you have.
Peter, I'm going to ask that you go back and let's just look at each of the reaches again before we get started. And we have more cards. My card people handout, please. And we'll hand out more cards. And if you have questions about any of these reaches, just put them down. As you can see, I have a lot of questions, which is great. I've been instructed we're going to extend the comment period, the Q&A period, so that we can try to get through at least some of these. But if you prefer, you're welcome to stay for the Q&A, or if you'd prefer to go to the back and take a look at the reaches close up, you can certainly do that. But we're going to start taking a look at some of these questions. So here's reach 1. We can move forward. Yeah? I just want everybody to have a chance to take another look. Could we do it in presentation mode so it's a little bit bigger? Thank you. They have alternatives for most of the reaches, I believe. There's more than one choice.
You can mix and match them, correct.
Let's go to 3. Can we see it in presentation mode so we're not, please? Thank you. Just keep going down. This is 3, 3A and 3B. Oh, we have to, yeah. Can we go to 4, please? So Belvedere. So here's 4A and 4B. This is the ferry terminal. Question about the duck pond. The duck pond. We need to know about the duck pond. You just have to.
Sorry. So in this situation, in order to weave the flood protection, which is the red line, in a way to minimize the impacts to the trees, the lily pond is reconstructed, redesigned, but it could be reinterpreted in a similar vein. So again, this isn't a design proposal, it's more of like a location of the alignment. So
If we could simply ask the people who are in the back to try to no, just a minute. Just a minute. We're about to start the Q&A, but I'm just asking if the people in the back would keep it down just a little bit so that we can have the Q&A here.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I mean, it works to do what we're trying to do, but. All right, I've now been told to jump to the Q&A, so I'm going to. So I would like to better understand the reason for why we're moving the ferry terminal north versus south. Who could answer that question? Garrett, do you want to direct that? Why north versus south? Moving it north not only further impacts the neighborhood via more noise pollution, but brings further exhaust from the ferry closer to where children play.
Understood. So in conversations with the Port Authority about moving the ferry terminal at all, it was our sort of immediate understanding that any move to the south could actually impact the operations of the marina, particularly with the ferries that are north-facing backing toward the ferry terminal. Also, there's the moment where the ferries all push against the terminal, and turbulent water then in a move south would be disrupting the mouth of the marina, disrupting the small sailboats, disrupting a variety of activities that are happening in the marina now. It is.
I
Yes.
think that
Correct.
the Bottom line is that we have to work with the Port Authority on this issue. We can't make a design decision without their okay on where the ferry terminal goes. And I think that's something that can be the subject of ongoing conversations. Or moving it south, I don't know. I mean, Again, we have gotten preliminary feedback from the Port Authority that moving it south is a no-go. That doesn't necessarily mean we can't continue to have some conversation.
Excuse me, one of the reasons that we're doing it this way is so that everybody can hear the questions, because they can't hear you. So let's move on. Could you provide detail on the wall along the building line in Reach 6? Is it a new wall? Are you extending the existing wall? What's the material and what's the thickness of it?
Yeah, so I would say that at this point, the design of the wall is basically, we know what its engineering parameters are. Maybe we can go to Reach 6. Thanks. So we know that, and this is assuming that it's it's alternative A. So this is the one where the esplanade stays where it is. The current elevation of the esplanade is at about plus 10 feet above mean sea level. Our design elevation here is at about plus 18 feet above mean sea level, which means there's an 8-foot difference between the level of the platform and the top of the wall, which is about the same height as the privacy wall. In terms of its thickness, I mean, generally it tends to be 2.5 feet thick, depending on what its construction is. There's a lot of other details that basically would be part of the design process, right? We're still here in planning and figuring out the alignment. The gates themselves, they tend to be constructed out of steel. They can be up to 70 feet long or so. And we think that that'll be long enough to basically bridge at the 3 street ends. So,
Jeremy, could you stay with 6, please?
Yes.
And keep going with, when looking at the alignment, were only solid walls considered? And can the 8-foot wall be something that is partially deployable and partially permanent?
why don't I, Peter.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when we think about the protection system that we're designing around the authority, there's a balance that we have to have between things that are deployable and things that are passive. We call them passive when they don't have to be, there's no intervention necessary to set them up, right? If we have a system that has, 1,000 interventions that are required, it might not have a significant urban impact, but it certainly takes away from the reliability of the system. And when you think about flood protection systems across the world and you analyze why they failed, most often than not, they failed because the intervention that was required wasn't made at the time that it was necessary. So what we're trying to do as a team, as we get into the design process, is balance where we can have passive, where we can have deployables, what we can use for deployables to make the wall less visible and less of an impact to the open space around it.
Can we go to Breach 5? Can we go to Reach 5, please? On Reach 5, what are the adjustments and changes to the public space? Can you go over that again, please? Specifically, where are the fountains? Where are the art pieces and projects? What happens to the public volleyball courts? How is the detail in Esplanade Plaza changing? And how does the memorial change? Do we know that yet?
Right. No, there's a lot. So, I mean, I learned this about Battery Park City because it's a state entity, a lot of memorials and art pieces are put here when they have state funding. The more you know. So, yeah, there's a lot of art here. There's a lot of memorials. I won't hit on every single one of them, but I'll just start with the broad strokes. In the northern area here, as we're coming away from the former Mercantile Exchange building, we're preserving all of Belvedere Plaza and the art piece at the promontory here, as well as the two obelisks here on the edge. The thing that we are changing is a strip that's probably about 40 feet wide, running through Belvedere Plaza. We've aligned it there to minimize impact to existing entities like art, as well as trees. It's the line that we can take that essentially impacts the least amount of trees. So pretty minimal over here. The whole terracing area here, I also learned, you could consider an art piece in itself. It was done in collaboration between the architects and an artist named Scott Burton. All of these stone elements, the circles, the triangles, the terraces. There's no way to run flood protection through here without reconstructing all of that. So that's a design, it's a challenge and also an opportunity. We certainly would want to be in conversation with the intent of that art and of the space as it existed previously, but as I said, there's also an opportunity here, we think, to evolve it forward and make it ready for the needs of the next 100 years or so.
Jeremy,
Sorry?
staying with 5A, the rendering shows slips that are currently used by the sailing school as being removed. Can you guarantee this will not happen?
I think a guarantee could only come from the authority or the operators. However, in terms of the design intent here, the intent would certainly be, because kayaking is a great activity, it's actually the kind of thing that we would like to happen as part of this. So I think we would for sure make sure that any impacts to that would be, oh, sorry, the sailboats, excuse me. I'm so sorry. The sailboats, the smaller boats. We would make sure that there's space for them, of course.
And also on Reach 5, when you're looking at 5A and 5B, which one is more expensive?
5B is more expensive. Because the breakwater itself that currently exists right now isn't really a wall that interacts with the river floor bed. So in order to build a structure that would prevent water from flowing into the marina, we'd have to build a sort of a dry dock wall that goes down into the riverbed. And that breakwater currently right now is it's sort of a suspended wall. So to construct down deep into the riverbed and then to create that gate, it's a very expensive undertaking.
There's another question about Reach 5A. This questioner says they don't understand what a design, quote, inland could look like.
Meaning further inland from this?
I think the inland option.
It's just hard to understand what this looks like on the ground.
Yeah.
I think we need to come back to you with more visuals, but I can try and explain a little bit while we're here. Basically, the area in front of the Winter Garden today, that upper plaza, it's at plus 13 feet above sea level. The design elevation that we have to reach with this is about plus 17. So we're really, and we're tuning it so that we can preserve views if you're standing there and you're a full-size adult, basically, and from also inside Brookfield Place as much as we can. So basically, it's an intervention about that high. It's of course not a wall. It's wide, right? There's stairs up and over. There are ramps up and over. There's water that would be along the back side. There's seating and planting and new shade that would be along the front side. So I think what we're really looking at here is kind of having something like what exists today, but new, and likely better from a use point of view. Yeah, so the volleyball court is here. It's pretty unimpacted by the flood protection. Up against the Gateway residences here, the platform will need to be reconstructed. When that platform is reconstructed, we'll need to grade back down to the existing level here, assuming that we're not reconstructing the platform here. So, there could be an opportunity to rethink, have volleyball still, but maybe make it into more of here we're representing just kind of a beach vibe, urban beach, but that's really open for the design process, which will be after we've selected the alignment.
Could we go back to Reach 4, please? Hang on for a second. I have to repeat your question, which if it was written, I wouldn't have to. So what you're asking is, say it again. Are you elevating the platform? Are you elevating the platform?
Yes, so in this reach and in the other reaches that we talked about reconstruction, we're elevating the platform to achieve the desired flood elevation that we're looking to do for design. It depends. The ultimate design is, 16 and 18 feet. And I guess I'm sure there's a question there about the hydraulic modeling, which we can get to when the question comes up. But I can explain a little bit more about how we think about design elevations when we get to that.
In terms of the experience, though, so the 16 feet is the flood protection elevation. That's to protect the neighborhood. Whenever we can, for sea level rise resiliency, we're going to a datum of about plus 12. So that's 2 to 3 feet above existing grade to get that added level of resiliency so that the promenade itself isn't flooding frequently in 20, 30 years.
Can we stay with hang on for a second, please. Can we stay with 5A, please?
Correct.
Hello?
2 feet.
Jeremy. Does this new elevation at 17 feet mean there's a 4-foot raising of the winter garden, or will there be a 4-foot wall blocking the winter garden?
Yeah. So the interior of the winter garden, we are not looking at raising it or reconfiguring it at this time. I don't think we ever will. The plaza in front of it, it needs to match into that height, right? Because you need to be able to pass from the inside to the outside. If the plaza behind it stays at its current elevation, which, as I said, it's actually 13.5 or so, the flood protection will be about 3.5 feet higher than that as currently modeled. Now, the models are still being run, so this is where we are now. Things and it's right at a tolerance, so it's close. The short answer is that yes, as currently modeled, there would be a roughly 3.5 to 4 foot new elevation edge, a barrier between that plaza and the waterfront, which means, as I said, if you're an adult, you can see over it. There's also potential to grade the plaza up to minimize that difference, which is something that we would look at in detailed design.
In looking at the South Esplanade, can we go to the South Esplanade? What is the height of the roller deployables in this reach?
Yeah, it is the same height as the existing privacy wall, which is roughly 8 feet above existing grade.
Could we go to Reach 4, please? So again, we're going to talk about the ferry terminal. This is a big issue. What is the cost to move the ferry terminal? And why is 4A even under consideration?
I can't speak to the exact cost of moving the ferry terminal. I think, what we've said thus far is that the authority has been in discussions with the Port Authority about the ferry terminal. Some of the conversations were about the difficulties of moving it south. What we had said earlier is that, we're in a tough balancing act here because it's difficult to construct what we want to construct and maintain access to the ferry terminal. I can commit to you that we're looking very hard to see if that's technically possible, but what we don't want to do is come to a public meeting and say something's technically possible when it's not.
Someone says here that the original ferry... Is there a reason why the project stops at Northmore?
Yeah, okay, so I mean, I think Jeremy had mentioned this when he went through this.
Peter, could I? The reason that the project stops at the endpoint in Tribeca is because we are authorized and our mandate is to protect Battery Park City. We spend Battery Park City generated funds to protect Battery Park City. In order to do that, we must go beyond the border. As I was mentioning earlier, we have to connect High Point to High Point. Otherwise, the water simply goes around the back door. But once we get to that high point, we no longer have to, in order to protect Battery Park City, go any further. It's beyond our jurisdiction. It's not beyond our mandate. What we have done, what we will do, and what we've always planned to do, is create an endpoint to the Northwest project that then can be, that another project in the future can connect to go further north. Right now, there is no project on the board. The city yet doesn't have one on the board to do that. But we certainly anticipate that it would be capable of connecting to another project.
Okay, here's a question. Are we going high enough? FEMA flood maps haven't been updated in 40 years, since 1983, and nearly every climate model seems to be underestimating impact rather than overestimating. I'd hate to see this neighborhood drawn and then have to redo this project bigger next time.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing during the design process to arrive at the flood protection alignment height. So generally speaking, when you design a flood protection system, there are 4 components that you think about. The first one is the height that the water comes up to during a storm. And FEMA represents that height. They call it a FIRM. It's basically a flood insurance map. And what FEMA does is FEMA looks at a set of data that represent this area. They do a lot of statistical analyses, and they come up with what they think is a statistical storm event for a certain frequency. That's what we call the base flood elevation. That's the first component, right? Now, there was the comment about FEMA. We understand FEMA is revising their P firms for the region. We recognize that. The new P firms are going to be available in 2024, but the authority, like all the agencies in the city, like the Port Authority of New York, is mandated to design to the current map that's out there right now by FEMA. So that's the design benchmark that we're working with. The second component is the climate change, the effects of global warming that are going to increase those storms, right? Right now, the city has put together a panel, NPCC, and us, again, all the city agencies, the Port Authority, we're all using the city's projections of what climate change looks like for 2050. There's probably a lot of commentary on whether they're good, bad, or reflect the science. The bottom line is all the agencies designing all the capital projects are using that. It's considered the best standard right now in the city. Well, there are different percentiles for different, you choose.
Peter, could you repeat what he just asked?
Yeah, he asked about the percentile, the 90th percentile, the 50th percentile. You choose through the design process what percentile you're looking to achieve. Well,
Excuse me, we can't do a conversation because the people online can't hear, and we can't do it that way. I'm sorry.
but part of this design process is to look at climate change, establish the projection, and then add that. The third component of this is the interaction waves have with the thing that we're designing for. Jeremy was talking about the visual impacts on the North Cove area, right? So you can visualize that the wave coming in from the Hudson has a lot of stuff it has to interact with in order to get to the edge of the plaza. we'll have to model, once we assume what the designs are going to be, how the waves are going to crash over those structures and interact with those structures, and to see how those structures may cause the waves to dissipate. And that's a detailed exercise that we have not begun yet. And then the fourth component is what we call overtopping. Because in some cases, you don't have to design to not let a drop of water in, because sometimes the cost of that to the urban fabric is very consequential. So sometimes you want to draw a balance and you want to allow slight overtopping so that you don't have to push the wall up so high. So again, the base flood elevation governed by FEMA, the climate change governed by MPCC, the interaction with the waves on the structures, we call that wave run-up, and then the fourth is any kind of allowance for overtopping. As we begin the design process, we're going to study and look at all four of those, and then refine the design assumptions as we move through that.
Could we go?
I know the question was in particular was about, are we going high enough? And I thank you, Peter, for that explanation. I think that's really helpful. But one of the things that we're also taking into account, because we don't know for sure exactly what's going to happen and what the impacts are going to be, and they could be worse. So one of the things that we are charging this design team with is to make this, whatever this project is, adaptable. So that in the future, if some additional height or additional elevation needs to be added, we think about that now. We prepare for that now. We don't necessarily do it now. We just think about how we would make the current system adaptable. So if we have to come back in 20, 30 years and our 40 years and add some additional height, we already have the groundwork laid so that we can do that.
And I just want to build one more on the answer that I just gave, my apologies. In addition to the computational modeling that we're going to be doing, the authority and our team are going to be building a scaled physical model of the system, because in many instances when you design large hydraulic structures around the world, you validate the computational work with the scaled physical model, because some components of hydraulics are very difficult to mathematically capture accurately. And we hope that that will give us more refinement for the design flood elevation.
Peter, I'm going to ask you one more question about flood elevations, and then we're going to go to Reach 3. If revised flood elevations with FEMA are released in 2024, will that be too late to adjust the designs based on the published timeline? What modifications would be eligible? And why not wait 18 months to see what the new levels are? What percent, 90 versus 50, is being used as a plan?
Right. So to your first question on the FEMA appeal. So some of you know the city had appealed FEMA on the flood protection maps. I'm going to say that Arcadis is intimately familiar with that because we did the math for the New York City folks as we appealed for them, so we supported the appeal. I think as we think about the appeal, one of the things that is significant is to recognize that, remember I said that elevation is really, it's a mathematical exercise that reflects a current set of data about storms. One of the weaknesses of the current flood maps is that they don't reflect Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, sorry. So many of us we're awaiting the exercise that's going to be released in 2024. The exercise is going to incorporate Superstorm Sandy's data into that pool of data. It's very difficult to predict what the P firm is going to be in 2024, but I would say that, you know, the authority, all the other city agencies, the Port Authority, right now, it's generally considered to be the benchmark for the design process, and right now our plan is to go with that, and then if there's any revisions, we'll obviously be thinking about those, and obviously we'll be talking to FEMA between now and when the P firms get released so that we can calibrate what might be coming down with what the authority is doing.
Okay, let's go to 3A. I have a bunch of online questions that... I'm sorry?
Our sea level rise expert is in the back of the board, so I'm going to get that answer and I'll make sure that it gets in the notes.
Okay.
I believe it's the 90. I just want to...
by the New York City climate change and the city of New York because it is a low probability but a very high consequence event. And that's also been adopted by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay. Just to repeat that, the percentile that's being projected for sea level rise is 90%, is the 90th percentile. That has been adopted as the most prudent course of events by the New York City Panel on Climate Change because even as a low probability event, it is very high consequence. So they've adopted that as the most prudent planning criteria, and that has been adopted by the City of New York in Local Law 96 from 2013. So all capital projects in the City of New York are to be built in accordance with that assumption for sea level rise. It's not just this project, it's every project in the City of New York.
Okay, so let's go to 3. These are some online questions, some folks who are watching us. What is an extended period of the park? What period of the park will be shut down in 3A, and for how long? Can you speak in greater detail as the closing of the park will pertain to timelines?
It's a little early for us to commit to the durations. I would just say that alternate 3A takes into great consideration an attempt to leave a large percentage of the park open during construction at any given time. We haven't worked out the design or the details of construction, so I really can't speak to the specific phasing. But again, the intent of this is to have a minimal impact of park operation.
Why would 3A close parts of the park for longer than 3B? Or would 3A?
It wouldn't actually, yeah. 3B would close parts of the park much longer than 3A.
It was said that under the first option, which I guess is 3A is the first option, Rockefeller Park in the future would be unavailable for, quote, extended periods of time. Why would that be? What does that mean? And what would the extent be to which Rockefeller Park would be unavailable under each scenario?
I think if you look at alternative 3A, what that does is it leaves a large portion of the park unaffected from an elevation standpoint. Existing to remain. Right. What the project would endeavor to do as part of what we're doing is to create minimal intervention in areas throughout the lawns to improve drainage. So if there would be any extreme rainfall or any kind of tidal flooding, that the drainage performance of the Rockefeller area would be improved as we think about the future.
Where are you going to get the landfill from? Will it smell bad?
I believe they're referring to 3B. Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. I wouldn't refer. Yeah, if we would choose 3B, we would be elevating some of the park. We would import suitable soil. I wouldn't refer to as landfill. And that would be engineered soil that would have a certain weight characteristic that would be appropriate for the plantings that we would be intending to plant. And there's lots of places in the city where you can, obtain soil like that.
So Canal Street flooded during Superstorm Sandy. What prevents the water coming in from the north after coming? I don't know. What prevents the water coming in from the north?
As Gwen was saying earlier, the reason why Reach 1 and Reach 2 are configured the way they are is because if the authorities stop the wall at 9A, it would remain vulnerable to water coming down 9A, and because of the low topography of Tribeca. So if you didn't think about who owns what and you just thought about the topo map, you'd recognize that you would need to go into Tribeca in order to prevent the water from coming around the flood protection scheme that is being proposed to build.
Under Reach 1, has Battery Park City Authority met with State DOT to further consider the use of the median on 9A?
We've met with state DOT, we've met with city DOT just in the last few months. And the issue with the median is and has been that in this particular segment of the project area, whether it's a southerly alignment that goes to Chambers or the northerly alignment that goes to Northmore, there is a 72-inch diameter sewer interceptor line directly below the median. So placing anything parallel to it or on top of it is a non-starter with the city DEP. It just simply can't be done because of concerns for loading, because of concerns for access, long-term maintenance. So we have thought through alternatives, but they might mean reconfiguring the striping or relocating the median itself, which is a whole separate conversation that just has potential merit. We're just not there yet. But it may be reconfiguring where that median is.
Will we at some point be able to see the difference in green space and cost between the different plans?
Yes, as we develop the design further, we'll be able to speak to those levels of detail.
If we are using New York City plans and assumptions, why aren't we linking this project with other New York City projects and funding?
But why are we not linking it to for funding? Well, we definitely are linking it to other New York City projects. The objective for our project is to be entirely consistent with and compatible with all of the other city-funded projects in Lower Manhattan. As a matter of fact, our two projects comprise a portion of the overall Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Program. That's why we are working in close coordination with them, in close collaboration with them, to make sure that our standards and our criteria and our design targets are the same as theirs, so that they all operate as a system once they are completed. We are a separate state authority, and so we have bonding authority. We have capability to fund the projects, and we are expecting to use that bond funding mechanism to pay for these projects. And it's important to note that all of the money, the revenues generated by Battery Park City Authority after the payment of the authority's operating expenses and debt service goes straight to the City of New York. And that's why the City of New York has to approve our bond issuances, because it means that they are getting a little bit less money because we're covering debt service instead of giving all of that excess revenue over to them every year. And so that is the way that the funding works in the interaction between Battery Park City Authority and the City of New York.
There's a question here about process, and I think we need to explain the progressive design build process. The question is, why was the architectural and design team changed for the Northwest project?
The North project, the North Battery Park City Resiliency project, was begun as a design bid build project. So it was designed, it was commenced under a different delivery system before the authority received design build authority from the state legislature. We went through a procurement for that project, the North project, as distinct from the West project. And during that procurement process, we retained AECOM as the design engineer for that project, and that project was initiated and commenced, and we went through about 30% design with AECOM as the design engineer. Once we made the determination to combine the two projects and to switch to a progressive design build delivery system, it required us then to approach the procurement and the design in a different way. And so we did a new procurement for a consulting engineer. AECOM was selected as our consulting engineer. That's a different role than the designer. The consulting engineer acts as the authority's owner's rep and really kind of oversees the design process and the EIS process. And so we were obliged to create a new procurement to bring on the progressive design build team that would include the contractor and the design team. That's how that worked.
These are questions about modeling. Given the complexity of the project, will there be detailed models of each reach? And when? When? Physical models.
Yes, there'll be computational models of each reach, and there'll be a full physical model for the entire reach at a reduced scale.
You know when that would be available for the public to see?
I think that's something that we would have to respond to when we, that's a design process thing. And, we'll be active doing design for the next 12 months for this project. So at some point during that, but we'll get back to you on that.
Okay. Timeline-wise, temporary resiliency measures are already purchased and are already being used by Battery Park City Authority and building owners. Why not wait until the FEMA revisions and the appeal is settled? These plans seem to be 1 year ahead of what is needed at a minimum.
Yeah, I would just respond and say that all the city agencies, the Port Authority, everybody else is spending money. I mean, we're coming onto the 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Sandy in a couple of weeks. And I guess there's a desire to have things built. And so all the other agencies are not waiting. The Port Authority is not waiting. And I can't speak to whether the authority should wait. That's not my decision. But like I said, the benchmark for doing this work in New York is to use the acceptable FEMA base map that's currently available and the MPCC projections from New York City and combine them to do the design work.
Okay, somebody asked about this meeting tonight, if it would remain open for comments. It will. The presentation will be posted online, and you will be able to comment. Rockefeller Park. Why are we worried about taking the park out of service for an extended period of time when reconstruction would take it out of service for 2 years?
I guess I'm not sure if it's clear, but I think 3A, basically the park and the lawn area remains largely open during construction. As Peter mentioned, there's some more detail to be added to that. So the only comment is that by having this park existing, this portion of the park, the lawn area, lower, it just means in the future it may be subject to inundation, but we'd be monitoring and work, redesigning the engineering of that lawn to increase drainage and frankly reduce that possibility where possible.
So what someone is interpreting that question to mean, and I don't know that that's what that person meant, but your question is, if a storm would close it only for a month, reconstruction would close it for 2 years.
Right. I'd first start by saying that a lot of the public feedback we've received to date has favored minimalist approach to the Rockefeller Park, which is why the team's considering it. I think as we get into the details of the design, the extent to which the park is out of service depends so much on the storms in the future. when they occur in the future. Is it this decade? Is it next decade? Is it the following decade? So I think, again, it's all trade-offs. But again, the whole exercise here is to get feedback from the public. And it's very clear looking at the 500 comments that there's a lot of passion about keeping open spaces accessible to the public during construction. And so that's why we have this as an alternative.
So there are several. Had you mentioned that the kids' park would be closed during construction? What's the rationale for elevating the kids' park, which is behind the wall?
So the idea here is everything that is in the more intense color is to be impacted. So the idea with the children's park is that one could remove the equipment that is fairly new equipment, build up that zone, and then have the entire kids park free and protected.
I want to make sure that we answer some of these folks who are online who've been asking questions. How long will the work take overall? Will it be done in phases? Will it be done all at once? What's the approximate timeline for the project? How can we be thinking about this?
So we are obviously very early in this process. We do expect that there will be a phased approach to construction that balances construction being done in other parts of Battery Park City, providing maximum open space and balancing when those spaces are open, closed, and how many over the course of 1.3 miles long. This is an incredibly large project. So the timing and sequencing of how closures and disruption occurs and making certain that it doesn't necessarily occur all together in one spot or all at once is going to be very important. We haven't sorted out exactly how that rolls out just yet.
Can you expand your comment to create drainage improvements under 3A to address flooding from rainfall? You mentioned that was part of the plans, but we haven't seen that mentioned in any of the previous materials.
Yeah, I think there's just a general, sort of a general principles that if we would leave Rockefeller Park like that, we'd want to have sort of minimalist intervention into that open space to just improve the drainage. I don't think we're talking about a very significant capital project, but there are ways to improve the drainage of locations like that with relatively minimal intervention and relatively minimal cost. But we just think that moving forward, improving the drainage of those open areas would be important for the project.
So staying with that same thought, will there be a point at which you'll be able to quantify the change to active green space reach by reach for each proposal at each stage? You want to know square footage.
For sure. As we get into the design process and the drawings become more detailed from a technical perspective, we'll be able to quantify with more precision specific impacts, the square feet of green space, number of trees, more precisely. Right now, these are just concept alternatives that are evolving from the last public meeting to now, and they're represented with more detail to give you folks sort of a better way of visualizing them.
Why is the effect on current residents not a design principle?
I would say it's absolutely design principle. I would say, again, the team came to this meeting studying the 500 comments that we've received thus far from the different community engagement exercises that the authority has gone through. And we've tried to factor in that feedback into our alignment choices. And so hopefully you can see that we're reflecting some of that thought in the proposals that were shown on the screen today. But absolutely, the community feedback is critical to the design process, and we hope to receive more feedback like this and continue to receive feedback as we develop more and more detailed designs and present them to the public.
How and where will the public have the opportunity to reach or touch water in any of the reaches?
Yeah, I think that there are a few reaches where, particularly in places that we're rebuilding the platform, that we think there's a place to do that. One of them is the Northern Esplanade along Stuyvesant High School, reach 2. The other, yep, to show it here. Particularly at that corner there. There's also really great views out to the west, to New Jersey. So, we really see this as a nice opportunity. Potentially along the platform here as it moves west. But then the other big one, or there's 2 that we're looking at. One of them is at Reach 5, which, as we spoke about, could be in conjunction with some of the platform reconstruction that'll be happening in the waterfront plaza. And then the final one would be at Reach 7.
I could speak to this drawing a little more. So, again, this isn't a design, but it tries to give you a sense of the potential of the alignment and what could happen here. So basically, this is this lower platform that I mentioned earlier that is at a very low level. I'm sure you've all walked there. It's extraordinary. And that was the artist's intent, right? To feel the change of the water, to experience the water. So all of this is not a design, but it's an initial concept, which is like being able to kind of pull safe access forward and above that, and potentially as sea levels rises, that this kind of lower platform could be transformed into, say, an intertidal habitat. So this would also be, that's the intent of this piece of art, right, is to kind of bring you up and over. So that would potentially be also possible here.
Can you estimate how many trees will be impacted in each of the reaches?
I could say this, I could say we're trying to be very sensitive to the issue of trees. At this point, we don't have an exact count of the trees that we're impacting. But as we walk through these alternatives, you can see that the choices that we're trying to make are choices to maintain the trees. Kate talked about this in the reaches that she was presenting. We talked about that in Reach 3. We talked about that in Reach 6. And we talked about that in Reach 7. So we're trying very hard to reflect the feedback that we've received. There's been a lot of the comments of the 500 have been about the trees. And it's really, the design team is wrestling with that choice and that balance.
Will all of the flood walls in your plans be permanent, or will they only be deployed and visible when there's a flood?
I think I spoke about this a little bit earlier. We're looking to have a balance. We don't want to have everything that's passive, because what that does is that generally creates an exaggerated impact in sort of the urban fabric of the authority. We don't want to have it all deployable, of course, because what that means is that we have to do a lot of intervention to set it up. So what we're doing right now as we progress the design is to find the balance of reliability. And like I said before, global flood systems don't fail because the wall broke. Global flood systems fail because someone didn't intervene when they were scheduled to. And so we're trying to be very mindful of the reliability of that as we look at that balance.
Just define what intervention.
Like an intervention is somebody has to go and set something up. Somebody has to go close the door, lift a gate, etc.
So the question that's being asked is a reference to another project in the city where floodgates had to be put up and taken down at great expense. And there seems to be a call for additional education to explain to people how these floodgates might work. Fair enough? I said there was a fair amount of, yeah.
It's a different kind of flood protection, that one.
So I want to go to some questions about funding. Questions about funding. And I think we're going to bring Gwen back for this. Is Brookfield helping fund these improvements? They're a major beneficiary of this work and are exempt from land lease payments for the foreseeable future.
The approach to funding for the project has been a sense that this is a project that is a regional project. It's a project that benefits Battery Park City. The Lower Manhattan projects benefit all residents and people who live and work in Lower Manhattan. Because it is so critical, because the urgency is there to get the projects done, get them done in a timely way. The funding for the project is being assumed by Battery Park City Authority and without going to each of the potential beneficiaries of the project to ask for funding contributions. So for all of the flood barrier system, the resiliency components, we are approaching it as a public good that Battery Park City Authority is assuming the funding obligation for it. Vijay, do you want to add to that?
That's right, Gwen, and I just wanted to add, Brookfield does pay ground rent and pilot, and as other buildings do in the neighborhood, and so this funding stream that Gwen is referencing, you know, we draw down from the revenues we collect from the neighborhood, both ground rent and pilot, and so no, Brookfield it's a different, yeah, you're right, the level of ground rent they pay because of a ground lease that was executed a very long time ago, but they do pay ground rent. But anyways, all that to say is that the money that covers what we draw down on for debt service is from the revenues we collect, whether it's lease revenue or pilot revenue from entities like Brookfield. And we pay the debt service as part of our obligations before calculating the excess revenue to the city. What's that? No, there's not a direct connection between our costs for these projects or any connection between our costs for these projects, ground rent, and pilot. We don't set pilot, first of all. That's the city of New York, and ground rent is based on existing lease structure. And because of the financial framework we have, we're able to cover our debt service and still have capacity to give excess revenues to the city of New York. So we have the coverage of that mechanism.
This goes back to design. Is flooding from rapid rainfall being addressed by these plans? Or is it only flooding and storm surges being considered?
So we are considering ways in which green infrastructure can be incorporated. Of course, there are cloudburst events that are so extreme that all the best planning and design in the world cannot necessarily handle some of the volumes of the freak storms we've seen recently. That said, there is consideration for what's called residual flooding, which is rainfall behind the barrier system. And theoretically, the idea is that the area behind the barrier system is meant to stay dry, but of course it's still raining, and runoff is still entering that area. So as part of the what's called interior drainage modeling and analysis, we are looking to see under several different types of rainfall scenarios where residual flooding may occur and what we might need to do to intervene.
Have you considered any natural solutions instead of barriers and walls?
Initially, we, I think as sensitive designers, as a landscape architect myself, certainly are attracted to nature-based solutions. There is presently great difficulty in this particular project area, given how little space we have, And given the goals of FEMA accreditation and certification that limit the nature-based solutions as the only solution. It can be and should be a consideration. I think REACH 7 is an example of where that represents itself, where we have an opportunity to incorporate elements, but by and large, it does not work on its own.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, like, learning from nature, one of the things that we're doing wherever we can is creating layered protection. Where we have layers, we're able to reduce the ultimate design height. Basically takes from, dune systems and wetlands and those kinds of things. It's an urban version of it. We have very tight parameters. We know that we need something that's at 12-foot elevation, a minimum of 30 feet away from the wall for a certain distance. So we'll be accomplishing that either with vegetation or elevated platforms or seating. Yeah, I mean, as Garrett was saying, it's very constrained. It's an urban place, and the design will reflect that.
Yes? I don't know the answer to that. Is commerce being built into this plan?
Commerce being, sorry, can you just clarify what you mean by commerce? Oh, no, nothing right now in like newly built, but certainly the commerce of Brookfield Place, of a lot of the existing buildings, is something that we're thinking about. For example, over here in Reach 7, along the Regatta building here, there are a lot of ground floor uses. There's a restaurant, there's a school. At Brookfield Place, there's PJ Clark's and the district, et cetera. So it's part of it in that sense. We're thinking very carefully about what exists, but right now we're not adding anything new. It's all public space now.
So I want to thank everybody for your patience tonight. I know that there were moments here that were challenging. Appreciate you listening. We're going to answer all of the questions, and we'll put together a Q&A. I hope it's clear that this is the part of a process. It's not the end of a process, and we'll be meeting together many times in the future.